The night Jenny did not come home. On the evening of June 30, 2005, the town of Richmond in North Yorkshire was settling into another quiet summer night. The streets were calm, pubs were beginning to close, and nothing about the atmosphere suggested that a life was about to vanish without explanation. 19-year-old Jenny Nicholl lived with her parents on Bolton Avenue, a modest residential street surrounded by rolling countryside. Richmond was the kind of town where people recognized familiar faces, where young adults often returned home after a night out, and where danger felt distant. Jenny had grown up there. She was known. She belonged. That evening, Jenny told her mother Anne that she would not be coming home that night. She did not explain where she was going or who she was seeing. This was not unusual. Jenny often went camping with friends and would return the next day. She took some personal belongings that suggested an overnight trip, kissed her mother goodbye, and left the house. She never came back. Jenny was last believed to be driving her white Rover 214. There was no sign of distress, no argument, no indication that anything was wrong. Her parents assumed she was safe and simply spending the night elsewhere, as she had done many times before. Jenny was not a reckless teenager. She worked at a local co-op, had responsibilities, and was known to show up when she was expected. She was also deeply involved in music. She loved classic rock, especially Jimi Hendrix, and played in a local band called No Fouling. The band had performed at the Richmond Live Music Festival and had reached the finals of a Battle of the Bands competition in 2002. Jenny was creative, social, and well known in the local pub scene where the band played. She lived a full life. She had plans. The next day, Jenny failed to show up to pick up a friend as arranged. Calls to her phone went unanswered. As the weekend passed, concern began to grow. By Monday, Jenny had not turned up for work and had not contacted anyone. 4 days after Jenny left home, Anne Nicholl reported her daughter missing. Later that same day, Anne made a discovery that shifted the case into something far more serious. Jenny's white Rover was found abandoned in a pub car park in Richmond. The car appeared untouched. There were no obvious signs of a struggle. It was simply parked and left behind. Now the questions began. Why would Jenny leave her car behind? Why would she abandon it in a place so close to home? And why had she not contacted anyone since leaving her parents' house? A description was released to the public. Jenny was slim, around 5'6", with fair hair, often worn in a ponytail and green eyes. She was last seen wearing blue jeans, black trainers, a sleeveless crop top, and a hooded parka-style jacket she often wore. Hundreds of posters were printed and distributed throughout North Yorkshire. The police began to search, but there was no clear direction. No witnesses had come forward. No one could say for certain who Jenny had been with that night. Days later, Anne and her husband Brian searched Sandbeck Plantation, a wooded area known locally for camping. There, partially hidden beneath leaves, they found Jenny's cosmetics and a nightdress. The discovery was devastating. Jenny was now officially missing, but something about the scene suggested she had not simply chosen to disappear. There were no signs of planning, no goodbye messages, no withdrawal of money, no packed bags waiting elsewhere. As one officer would later say, this was not how people vanished by choice. The messages that lied. As the search intensified, police focused on Jenny's social circle. Friends described her as private and emotionally guarded. She did not confide easily. She kept parts of her life to herself. This made the investigation difficult. On July 6, police publicly stated they were becoming extremely concerned for Jenny's welfare. The following day, an incident room was set up at Richmond Police Station, and 20 officers were assigned to the case. Pubs, campsites, and rural areas were canvassed. Officers went door to door, attempting to reconstruct Jenny's final movements. Then something unexpected happened. On July 10, Detective Inspector Pete Martin made a public appeal, asking Jenny to contact her parents and reassure them she was safe. Her family waited anxiously. Days later, messages began to arrive. Texts were sent to Jenny's friends and family, from locations including Carlisle and the Scottish borders. The messages claimed Jenny had left voluntarily, was living with a boyfriend in Scotland, and was intentionally staying away. They included emotional language, anger toward her parents, and references to personal details. At first glance, the messages appeared genuine. They mentioned issues with Jenny's car, conflicts with her parents, and private information only someone close to her would know. But something felt wrong. Jenny's mother did not believe her daughter would disappear without preparation. Jenny had not withdrawn any money. Her passport was still at home. She had prepaid for 25 tanning sessions and had used only 2. These were not the actions of someone planning to start a new life. Police began to examine the messages closely. They noticed inconsistencies in spelling, phrasing, and writing style. Jenny typically used informal shorthand. The messages did not match her usual patterns. Linguistic analysis later suggested the texts were written by someone attempting to mimic Jenny, but failing to capture the nuances of how she actually communicated. The messages had likely been sent to create a false trail. Someone wanted it to look like Jenny was alive. Investigators now believed they were dealing with a deliberate deception. As attention turned inward, police uncovered something disturbing. Jenny had been involved with an older man. David Hodgson was a married father of 2 in his 40s. He knew Jenny through his daughters, who attended school with her. Police would later determine that David had been grooming Jenny since she was around 14 years old. Initially, David denied any sexual relationship. Later, he admitted they had slept together on several occasions, claiming it only began after she turned 16. David and his brother Robert were familiar with the surrounding countryside. They had built huts and hides in wooded areas where they camped and drank. DNA evidence would later show that Jenny and David had sexual contact in at least 2 of these locations. 9 days after Jenny vanished, David was questioned by police. He denied any involvement and claimed he had not seen her around the time she disappeared. Police were skeptical. The body that never came back. As weeks turned into months, the investigation deepened. CCTV images of Jenny, taken just days before her disappearance, were released. On what would have been her 20th birthday, her mother unveiled a large banner appealing for information. Behind the scenes, the case was shifting. On November 3rd, police announced that the investigation was no longer a missing persons case. It was now a murder inquiry. That same day, David Hodgson gave a newspaper interview, claiming he had received death threats and insisting Jenny had planned to leave. He said he had lent her a large sum of money shortly before she disappeared. Police continued to focus on David. They discovered that on the same night Jenny left home, David had told his own family he was going camping. He returned the following morning. On the days the suspicious text messages were sent, David had hired a car. The mileage on the vehicle could not be accounted for and matched travel between the message locations. In January 2006, David and his brother Robert were arrested on suspicion of murder. Robert was later released without charge. David was bailed pending further inquiries. In March, police made a breakthrough. During meticulous fingertip searches at Sandbeck Plantation, officers discovered Jenny's teddy bear and portable stereo. These were the first items to place her in that area after she vanished. The woodland was known to be an area where David and his associates had built huts. Over 150 acres were searched. Soldiers assisted. Caves, mine shafts, and moorland were examined. Still, Jenny's body was never found. Forensic linguistics became a cornerstone of the case. An expert compared Jenny's known text messages with those sent after her disappearance, and with messages written by David. The analysis revealed shared errors and phrasing between David's writing and the fake messages. The conclusion was not absolute, but it was powerful. Someone very close to Jenny had sent those messages. Someone who knew her secrets. Someone who knew she was already gone. Justice without a grave. In May 2007, nearly 2 years after Jenny vanished, David Hodgson was formally charged with her murder. The prosecution acknowledged the unusual nature of the case. There was no body, no confirmed crime scene, but the evidence, they argued, told a consistent story. At trial, the prosecution presented a narrative of control, jealousy, and escalation. Jenny had grown closer to David's brother Robert shortly before her disappearance. This fueled David's possessiveness and anger. Prosecutors argued that Jenny met David on the night she vanished, likely during a camping trip. During an argument or confrontation, she was killed. Her body was disposed of somewhere in the surrounding countryside. The fake messages were sent afterward to delay suspicion and buy time. The defense claimed Jenny had run away to escape her father, an accusation the judge would later dismiss as entirely unsupported. After 5 weeks of testimony and 10 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a unanimous verdict. David Hodgson was found guilty of murder. He was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 18 years. The judge stated that the evidence against him was overwhelming. His refusal to disclose where Jenny's body was hidden had prolonged the suffering of her family. David showed no remorse. Years later, his case would be cited in discussions surrounding Helen's Law, legislation designed to prevent offenders who refuse to reveal the location of a victim's remains from being released early. Jenny's parents have never asked David where their daughter is. They refuse to give him that power. Jenny Nicholl's body has never been recovered. Her family continues to live with the cruelty of not knowing where she rests, not being able to say goodbye, not being able to bring her home. This case is a reminder that justice does not always come with closure, that sometimes the truth is enough to convict, but not enough to heal. Jenny was 19 years old. She was a musician, a daughter, a friend, a young woman with a future stolen from her by manipulation and violence. She mattered, and she is not forgotten.